My sisters and brothers, the Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the good news of Jesus Christ according to St. Mark.
Glory to you.
The apostles gathered together with Jesus and reported all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." People were coming and going in great numbers, and they had no opportunity even to eat. So they went off in the boat by themselves to a deserted place. They hastened there on foot from all the towns and arrived at the place before them. When he disembarked and saw the vast crowd, his heart was moved with pity for them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. The good news of our salvation.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Brothers and sisters, there were two images that came to mind as I reflected on the gospel text and also the first reading from Jeremiah. First image was the very tragic image of the condo building in Miami, Florida, that collapsed just a few weeks ago. And we're still living in the aftermath of that awful, awful situation. And the image I have is really, well, the image I'm sure that we all have is that building, this glorious building right on the ocean, was collapsing like in a split second. That's the first. The similar image is the image of Pope Innocent III in the 13th century. And similar in this sense, he was having a dream. It wasn't an actual, like the collapse of the building in Miami, but it was a dream of the Pope's Cathedral or the Pope's Church, the Basilica of St. John Lateran. And in the dream, he saw the building just falling apart and it was coming down, right? And in the dream, he saw the arms of a person, and the person happened to be Francis of Assisi, who was holding the building up, restoring the building. Jeremiah, in the first reading today, was living in a culture and a time when everything was collapsing, like these buildings. He's writing around 500 or 600 years before Christ, and in the southern kingdom of Judah, everything was collapsing. People really had lost their faith in God. It was no longer the belief in the one God. They were reverting back to their earlier pagan ways and the worshiping of many gods. And worst of all, it was like a sheep without a shepherd, as we heard Jesus say in the gospel, referring to Jeremiah, that even the king Hezekiah, wasn't able to protect the people. He really did not have the ability to save the people in this time when everything was collapsing. And so as a result, the southern kingdom was taken over by the Babylonians. Everything was falling apart. And these structures that were supposed to take care of the people were no longer reliable. And I would suggest that we live in similar times, like sheep without a shepherd. So we look, for example, to our country and the political systems in our country. Many people have lost confidence in those systems. And many people feel that those systems of our government are no longer reliable and no longer protecting them. I'm not saying I agree or disagree, but I think it's fair to say that that sentiment is there among so many. And we experience this even within the church itself. We're looking for shepherds to lead us. And so many times we feel like sheep without a shepherd. Where are our leaders? Where are our leaders leading us closer to Christ? And so often in our leaders, unfortunately, this is so absent so many times in these days. And so we live in a time where it's not just buildings are collapsing, but things seem to be collapsing around us. And so where, in fact, does that leave us? We see that Jesus in the gospel text brings his disciples to a deserted place. And the whole point of the deserted place, and then getting into a boat, crossing over to the other shore, he is inviting them to another kind of consciousness, another kind of awareness. And so this consciousness or awareness that Jesus is inviting them to, you notice he has pity, he has compassion on them. And so in the struggles that they were dealing with, he's proposing to them that they would become instruments of his compassion in a world and a culture that was once again collapsing in the time of Jesus as the country was overtaken by a foreign power, by the power of Rome. And so what comes to mind for me is this. A prayer that I pray is called the Jesus Prayer. And this is a prayer it's a repetitive prayer. You pray it over and over again. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And so I pray this prayer many times. And by the way, if I can't sleep at night, I pray it puts me to sleep, right? It's a repetitive prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And I prayed this prayer, probably tens of thousands, if not more times than that. And for me, where it's led me is this. It leads me to recognize that I am in communion with all of the sinners and all of the broken people of the world, because I too am one of them. I am no different. It brings me in communion as opposed to thinking that I am different from. And so as I pray the prayer, hopefully I'm gradually, one day at a time and one step at a time, becoming more compassionate in structures that are no longer serving people and where people feel so very abandoned. And also what comes to mind is a piece that was written by Stephen Levinson, and it's called A Deeper Pain Than Dying. A Deeper Pain Than Dying. Stephen Levinson and the people he was working with were ministering to people who had cancer. And in this particular piece, he writes about a woman. Her name was Catherine, and she was a cancer patient. And she would come week after week after week to these sessions that Stephen Levinson had, these group sessions where they were able to talk about their pain and their struggles and so on. Well, believe it or not, they reached a point where they became very suspicious of this Catherine, that she really did not have cancer, and that she was coming really saying that she had cancer, but did not, and also had become addicted to morphine. And Levinson says in his piece, A Deeper Pain Than Dying, is that what Catherine was going through, in a certain sense, was deeper than the physical ailment of cancer. She was going through a deeper sense of loneliness and alienation, crying out and reaching for help in a deeper way. And what Levinson writes is that he and his staff began to realize that they were no different than Catherine. Why? We are all crying out. We are all needy. We all experience that kind of loneliness and abandonment. And so the insight that he had was, again, that they were in communion with her. And that's really what Jesus is telling us in this text, that we are in communion with one another and with all those who suffer, who feel alienated in any way. And so they cross over to the other side, and the word that we would use today, they had compassion fatigue. So Jesus invites them over to come and rest, so that in resting, they now can go back again to bring that gift of compassion, because we all need to be replenished, especially when we have structures all around us that are collapsing. So we need to be replenished. You know, it's kind of like the rescue dogs. They need to rest before they go back and continue rescuing. And I'll leave you with this. There was a young priest that I was dealing with, and he told me we were now to do his ministry. There were too many distractions. There were too many people pulling him in so many different directions. And he said to me, the distractions were preventing him from doing his ministry. And I had to work with him over a period of time for him to recognize that the distractions are his ministry. To say it in another way, you know, God comes to us in the midst of the distractions of life, right? And that we need to pay attention to those who come into our lives. These are not distractions. And what's important, and the reason why we need to go away and rest a while when we have compassion fatigue, is because we always need to remember interruptions. Interruptions are very important. Why? Interruptions are important because God comes to us in the interruptions of life, and we need to make sure that we make room and we make time for interruptions, because that's where people who are in need will come, and that indeed is where we find God.